good evening to you, God Cheng, and to Selena. Thank you for joining me this evening. And I hope that in this session, you'll get something useful for yourself because we are discussing on cultures of meaning, exploring the power of context. So today we will delve into the profound impact of context on how we perceive and create meaning in our life. So we'll journey through the role of culture and context in shaping our understanding of the world. So in the 60 to 90 minutes, we'll be discussing on the importance of context in shaping meaning. As usual, I will pause for discussion after each main point. This is to invite questions, comments, and contributions. And just to remind you that my style is to be light and humorous. So if I laugh or smile, I'm never laughing at you, but at our silly human qualities. My purpose is to lighten things up, reduce being too serious, and be more real. This session is organized together with the Institute of Neurosemantics, Malaysia, and the Neurosemantics series is based on, let me just share screen. Yeah. Okay, so this series, Neurosemantics, the first Thursday, oops. It does that. Okay. Yeah, you've got that one, Selena. Good. Now, this series on the first Thursday of the month, it is reserved for neurosemantics. What I've been doing over the past year or so, I've been taking a topic from each chapter of the book. So, Selena, if you want to refer to the book, we are on chapter 8. Okay. So let's move to the first section here. That we are looking at the importance of context in shaping meaning. Yeah, let me just get some things out of the way. Okay. In our exploration of cultures of meaning, we must begin with an understanding of context. As the philosopher John Searle aptly puts it, knowledge without context is not knowledge. It's just information. So that's why we want to dive deeper into this idea and discover the significance of context in our everyday life. Just like in that movie, The Matrix, Neo and Morpheus, they were having that discussion. And what Morpheus said is that Neo, the Matrix has you. If we don't understand the context, culture, what will happen is that our lives will be driven and controlled by the context or the culture in that way. So that's why we are discussing this topic today, so that we can take the red pill and to be able to see the matrix surrounding us. And with what we are discussing today, what we are referring to the matrix is the matrix of culture surrounding us. So before we dive in, let's ponder a fundamental question. This is the meta question that I would like you to hold in your mind as we go through the session today. What is the role of context in shaping our understanding of the world? I would like you to hold this question in mind as we go through. Keep this question in mind as we explore the transformative power of context. So, diving deeper into this topic. Context is the key to meaning. It's what enables meaning to emerge. Imagine a simple statement like, how are you? When the both of you came into the room just now, I asked Guat Ching, how are you? And I asked you, Selena, how are you? Now, its meaning depends on the context. In the context of friends, just like what I asked you just now, is a warm greeting to welcome you to this session. But in a hospital or a therapy session, is a different meaning. So imagine you are lying on the hospital bed and the doctor comes and say, how are you? You'll be worried. How come doctor don't know how I am? Am I going to die or what? So it takes on different meaning because now the context is different. So context controls meaning. And without context, there is no meaning. And I frequently give this example of the interaction between Grasshopper and Nemi. She appeared to be slightly drowsy. So Nemi asked her, are you sleepy? She spun around, looked at Nemi. I'm not sleepy. I'm Snow White. Totally different context. Selena, you may be thinking, what's got to do with Snow White? No, the seven dwarfs, one of the seven dwarfs is sleepy. So Grasshopper is a girl. So obviously, she's Snow White, not sleepy. So context will determine or influence the meaning. Let's delve deeper into the idea of internal context. Yeah, we are looking at the role of internal frames in meaning making. These are the mental and emotional frames we have for understanding things. Your inner context serve as interpretive frames, shaping how you make sense of the world. They are the building blocks of meaning. For example, imagine you receive a text message from a friend that says, I can't believe you did that. Yeah. Just a text. Oh, so a text message doesn't carry the intonation. So you read, I can't believe you did that. Right? The interpretation and meaning of this message can vary significantly based upon your internal context, which includes your previous interactions, emotions, and beliefs. So here are some ways that you may interpret that text. I can't believe you did that. If you recently helped your friend with a surprise party and had positive interactions, you might interpret the message as, I can't believe you did that, with excitement and gratitude. In this case, your positive internal context shapes a positive meaning. However, if you had an argument or disagreement with your friend, you might interpret the message as, I can't believe you did that, with anger and frustration. Your negative internal context influences negative meaning. If there is no recent emotional charge in your relationship, you might interpret the message as a simple statement of surprise without any strong emotional connotation. So there is a neutral internal context. So in this example, the same text message can have different meanings depending on your internal context, highlighting how our personal experiences, emotions, and beliefs shape how we interpret and make meaning out of communication. So that's why, even though it takes me some additional keystrokes, whenever I send text message, I would do my best to put in an emoji. to let the person know my emotional context for sending that particular message. Yeah. So context as a frame, context sets frames. And in many ways, it becomes synonymous with the term frame. So that's why you'll notice people, sometimes they use the word frame, sometimes they use the word context. So it becomes synonymous. When we speak of frames of meaning, we are talking about the internal context that you use to classify and understand things. These frames are essential for creating meaning. So Grasshopper's frame of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs allows us to imprint the question, are you sleepy? Not from the physical perspective. However, it is from the fantasy, imaginative perspective. So those are the frames that interpret the context. Okay, so internal context as interpretive frames. Think of your internal context as lenses through which you view the world. They operate behind the scenes, shaping your interpretation and perception. Without these internal frames, you wouldn't be able to create meaning. Okay? With them, you become prolific meaning maker. Internal frames are critical for creating meaning. And I would like to pause there because the more the more skillful you are in creating frames, then the more empowering the meanings that you create. So it is not just about meaning making. Your frames, your context will influence the way that you create meaning. Okay, so before I continue on, just like to welcome Kat and Ines, who've just joined us. Thank you for joining us, Ines, all the way from Brazil. Good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Kid. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, we've started about a quarter of an hour ago, so I hope that you'll be able to follow us. And Kat, thank you for joining us. I think, Kat, you are joining us for the first time. So welcome. Now, moving on, cultural context. These play a very big role because when a child is born, the child is, if I will use the word, is thrown into the matrix of the culture. So it's the culture that begins to, I'll use the word, the culture is what begins to shape the way you create meanings and shape the way that you frame things. So think of your internal context as the lenses. Cultural context. So we are expanding the perspective to cultural context. Let me just move back a little bit. So first is that our internal context, they interpret whatever is happening out there. Yeah. So that's how we make meaning from what we see out there. Next is that when we are looking at us living in a society, in a culture, for example, here in Malaysia, we have the Malaysian culture. Ines, you are in the Brazilian culture. Even in Malaysia, we have the subcultures, the Malay subculture, the Indian, the Chinese subculture. So we have all of those people sharing that context. Culture is the context. Now, when we are looking into this, we need to realize that we are not alone in meaning making. It's a shared adventure. cultural meanings are psychological, but also neurological. And when we internalize them, we create cultures. The interplay between culture and context, that's dynamic. Culture influences our thoughts and behavior because we have aligned ourselves to a certain culture. And culture is transmitted through the ages, through the generations. It is passed down through generations. So how do cultures perceive over generations? They do so through transmission. Our ancestors passed down meanings, values, and beliefs through oral tradition, symbols, and artifacts. It is also through their behavior. For example, in Malaysia, we would not think so much about it that when we go to our house, we take off our shoes outside and step into the house because our parents did that, our parents' parents did that. So we value those and we begin to do that. Now, in other cultures, it's something, why do I have to take off my shoes? I remember when, was it the first daughter or the second daughter? When we had our second daughter, we were in Manchester. So the social worker comes to visit us. So even though, the Malay culture of not wearing shoes in the house is such that we take off our shoes when we get into the house. And when the social worker comes, we requested that she takes off her shoes. She was shocked. Oh, no, I'm not going to take off my shoes. I'll sit here and you bring the baby so that I can check the baby. That kind of thing. So it is transmitted through values, through belief, through oral tradition and symbols and so on. So cultures are the result of the rich tapestry of transmission and inheritance. So what is culture? Culture may sound like a concrete entity, but it's not. It's a nominalization. A nominalization is a term we cannot put in a wheelbarrow, meaning to say it's not solid, it's not physical, it's up here. Culture means to culture or to cultivate. For example, you want to grow curry plants. So you culture the curry plant so that it becomes a plant, and then you can take the leaves to make your curry. Yeah. So culture is about cultivating behaviors, morals, values, and attitudes. In essence, culture is how we learn to be human. So we learn about this culture. And through the enculturing process of valuing, believing, and behaving, we become the human that is defined by that particular culture, by that particular context. So cultivating minds and hearts, our minds and hearts are cultivated by culture. We receive this cultivation, and when I use the word cultivation, I'm laughing inside. Why? Now I'm seeing the picture of me as a plant. Somebody cultivate, and then I begin to grow. So we receive this cultivation through parenting, schooling, religious instruction, through social interactions. The content of what we learn becomes the program of the culture we are habituated to. So culture shapes how we understand and desire to be human. And that's a very profound thing to to say, because it is our culture that gives us, and we absorb that definition of what is human and what is not. Yeah. So that's why one of the sayings in the Malay culture about parents, one of the things that they say, I would say the prayer that parents make is that I hope that my child grows up and become a human. The word in Malay is jadi orang, become a human. Because if we don't take on the behaviors that our culture deem as human behaviors, then we grow up and our behavior are deemed as animal behavior. So it is the culture is what designed for us. And the next thing is that there is not only one culture, we are exposed to multi-cultures. So none of us has just one culture. We have many. And there is that culture that you get from your family, school culture, ethnic culture, and so on. So I mentioned, for example, Malaysia, we have the so-called the Malaysian culture. And then we have the subcultures, the Malay, Chinese, Indian. And then because we have the interaction between the subcultures, many of my cultures are already mixed with it, that is taken from other cultures, and it becomes my own personal culture. So even if you were to see your family culture and compare with another family culture, let's say you are from the same subculture, let's say Chinese, but your family subcultures might be different. So this is what we are referring to, multiculturalism. So these cultures exist in your mind and in the mind of those who accept them. So we as human beings are multicultural beings. And culture is an inside-out phenomenon. So this is where I would say a lot of misunderstanding about culture. For most people, the moment people talk about culture, then they think about the dress that they wear, the food that people eat, the celebrations that they go. So most people, when they think about culture, it is out there. However, we need to realize that culture starts inside. It is the inner game. It's first created in your mind, shaping how you think, emote, speak, and relate. Then it's externalized. So this is now becomes out there in various forms like books, rituals, and art. Culture begins internally and is externalized through behaviors and expressions. Cultures are shared meanings within a group. Cultures live both inside you and in the minds and hearts of those who accept it. So, for example, one of the cultures, eating, we accept. For example, in the Malay culture, as a group, we accept that when we eat with our hands. In the Chinese culture, when you eat, use chopsticks. So it is an accepted meaning, a shared meaning within the group. And then probably in the Western culture, you have to be the fork and spoon with fork and knife. So when they come to Malaysia, no knife, spoon. So we are referring to the a shared meaning within the group. Okay, so let's take a look at how cultures evolve. cultures, like living organisms, evolve and adapt over time. Just as species change to survive, cultures adapt to shifting circumstances. Cultural evolution is a process of growth, transformation, and sometimes decline. Now, we also can see from our historical understanding that some cultures, they were here for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and now they are gone. So cultures can come and they can also go. For example, the ancient Egyptians in 3100 BC, the pharaonic culture of ancient Egypt, with its pyramids and hieroglyphics transformed over thousands of years and eventually gave way to different eras and influences. The Roman Empire in 753 BC, we see the remnants of the grandeur of Rome, the buildings, the governance. It evolved over centuries. And it just declined and went away. We have the Mayan Empire in 250 AD. It was once a thriving civilization in Mesoamerica. The Mayan culture declined and eventually disappeared, leaving behind ruins and hieroglyphs. We also have the Inca Empire, a powerful empire in South America. And they are still discovering how widespread the Inca Empire is until today. In the jungles of Brazil, they are still discovering the extent of the Inca Empire. Where is it now? It's gone. So cultural evolution reminds us that change is a constant in human history, and understanding the past helps us to navigate the present and shape the future. Cultures evolve, grow, mature, and sometimes fade away. They change as the meanings and values they represent evolve. Just as individuals grow and change, so do cultures. Now, I'm pausing here a little bit when we talk about culture, because some people seem to think that culture is rigid, it must be there, and it must remain forever. Once we understand that cultures are part of our beliefs and frames, then it is not, it is not that surprising that cultures come and go. So, for example, I'm laughing here again because even in today's day and age, we have our parents, grandparents are insisting that you must go along. This is our culture. This is who we are. In the Malay language, we even have this, what do we call them, idiom, biar mati anak, jangan mati adat, to highlight the importance of culture. Roughly translated, it means that if our children were to die, that's okay, let them die, but don't let our culture die. So this is the kind of importance that people place upon culture, not realizing that culture is our construct. And since it is our construct, it changes over time. Okay, so the internalization of culture is that we inherit cultural frames through osmosis, meaning to say we were born into various cultural frames and tend to accept them without question. then these frames become our unconscious assumptions and blind spots. Okay, so I'm going to pause here to invite any questions or comments before I go to the next point. So any questions or comments? And yes, Guat Ching, Red Indians, they were not really Indians, but wrongly labeled. That's why we call
American native.
Sorry?
American native.
Yeah, we call them Native Americans. That's the
Native American.
Yeah, that's the right term for it. Yeah. So, questions, comments.
I think some of the culture is missing is because it's not applicable in the new era anymore. Like for example, ladies should stay at home. They shouldn't go out to work. So the culture change.
Cultures change, and especially today, where use geographical borders, which previously were borders to determine a person's culture, has changed so much because of the widespread communication process. We have the internet and all that, and because of the exchange of information, cultural understanding of one's culture and re-evaluating of one's culture becomes more and more dynamic nowadays. We are when we see something that is done, for example, what's happening in Brazil, and I see that, and the moment I say, hey, that makes sense, why don't I do that? And then I begin to adopt that, then it becomes part of my culture. So nowadays it's much more fluid, the way that we are adapting cultures from different parts of the world. The only thing is that why we went through that discussion earlier is for us to understand that culture is a construct. It is not fixed. And the Egyptians, the Mayans, the Incas, the Romans show to us that cultures can come and go. So they are not fixed and rigid. So in the next part, then we'll go into how we can manage our frames in order to be free of cultures in our quest in becoming a useful human being, to not be shackled by frames created by culture once we understand where culture comes from. Okay, so Kat, anything from you?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on. Right. We are moving on to how we are looking at the world and how we assimilate culture, to integrate it. Now, in as we move out from the culture that brought us up, then we begin to see other cultures around us. That makes us more aware that there are so many different cultures out there. To a large extent, I'm grateful that I grew up here in Malaysia, even though it is a kampong, a village, whereby they are full of my friends are mainly Malays. But however, from young, I've been exposed to, I had a best, I would say all my friends are best friends. All of them are best friends. So, so I grew up friends with a Chinese boy, Ang Yixiong. Until today, I can still remember him, even though 50 years I've not met him. And there was also a Korean boy in that particular village, Kim Kapsu. So being exposed to other people's culture, it makes it more readily for me to be able to see my culture. Because when we see how other people behave, then we do that comparison, then we realize, it's different. He does things in that way, I'm doing it in this way. So when we encounter different cultures, we can see ours differently, more clearly, so to speak. Yeah. So people who grow up in monoculture, where they are not exposed to other cultures, then the frame of culture then becomes much more rigid because they are not able to see that other cultures exist. So the experience of another culture can also reveal our cultural blind spots. So, and having those blind spots may not be useful for us when we move outside of our culture. So I remember in the mid-70s, so maybe Selena is thinking, wow, 60, 70, so long ago. I was already alive at that time, okay? The students who received a scholarship from the government to go and study overseas, before they sent us to the UK or US or Australia, we had a 1-week orientation program that the government prepared us for the cultural differences that we were about to experience. So one of the things, because I was about at that time to go to the UK, so they were telling us, so in the UK, your P's and Q's matter. Mine P's and Q's mean please and thank you. P are please, Q's are thank you. So if you don't make use of your P's and Q's, then you will be considered as a barbarian or something like that. And I remember a typical interaction. I stepped into the post office. So this would be the interaction. I stepped into the post office and the lady at the counter would greet me. Good morning, love. How are you today? And I need to interact. I'm fine, thank you. And she'll say, and how may I help you? Then I will say, I would like two 6-pence coins, please. So the please must come in there. And when I say please, she'll say thank you. And when she says thank you, I'll say thank you. and she'll, here are the stamps. There will be 12-pence, please. And when she says please, I'll say thank you, and I'll give her the 12-pence. Here's the 12-pence for it. Thank you. And she'll say thank you. She'll say have a nice day. And I say thank you, and you have a nice day too. Thank you, and thank you again. So do you count how many thank yous that happen? So we had to learn those cultures. It came to the point whereby I went to the vending machine. I bought myself a cup of coffee. When the coffee came out, I say thank you to the machine. Okay, so this refers to the fact that only when we are exposed to other cultures, then we are able to evaluate, assess our own culture. Now, let's take a deeper dive into this. We are looking at the meta states and cultural analysis. To understand cultures, we can apply the concept of meta state. So especially in neurosemantics, we are looking at how it is happening in our mind. So that's why I say culture is internal. This idea is drawn from John Searle's work. It helps us analyze and deconstruct cultural phenomena systematically. So we are looking at the primary level term. So the primary level term over here, that's where something is happening. Yeah. So the thing that is happening could be the example of the primary level term. Nami is saying to grasshopper, are you sleepy? So the primary level term is the question, are you sleepy? Now, in order for her to interpret that, so her interpretation is here, the meta term. That's her interpretation. In order for her to interpret, she has to be operating from the context first. So when asked the question, are you sleepy? She went to the context of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And from that context, determined that she's definitely not sleepy, she's Snow White. So the meaning is created from the context. So we have at the primary level, something happens. Before we make meaning, it refers to our context, and then we make that meaning. So it's the context that creates that meaning. Okay? So in Searle's formula, what he brought to us is that it's a very simple yet very powerful formula. X equals to, I'll put equals to Y in the context of C. So C is what determines what X is. So this formula encapsulates how context and meaning interact with cultures. So our culture, C, is what interprets that X is equal to Y. Okay, so let's take an example. Yeah. So we'll take the example of currency. So consider this piece of money, and that's an actual 50 ringgit note from my wallet. I scanned it for this particular session. This is at this level, the primary level. In the context of Malaysia, it is money. Yeah. In the context of Malaysia, it is money. I bring this particular piece of 50 ringgit note. I go to Brazil, to Ines, and give it to Ines. It's just a piece of paper to her. Yeah, because it's worthless outside of Malaysia. Only in Malaysia it is legal tender. Right? So it is the context that determines that piece of paper, it is the context that determines that piece of paper equals to money. Okay? So that's how we create meanings from our frames, from our context. Now, cultural meanings are complex. Yeah, cultural meanings are complex and multifaceted because different cultures now they have different contexts because each culture will determine the boundaries for the context, the rules, the conditions, the criteria. So the context determine when, how, and to whom something holds meaning. So like I gave you the example that when we eat in Malaysia, we eat just using hands. Of course, from young, our parents hit our head if we don't wash our hands before eating to make sure that when we eat with our hands, it is clean. So we learn how to wash hands and then we eat. Now, in China or in Japan, it's useful to eat with the chopstick. In Malaysia, the Chinese community, they eat with chopsticks. Ines, do you use chopsticks? No? Use chopstick? Okay. Right.
Well, I do here, but in general, it's fork and knife.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
For Brazilians, it's fork and knife. Right? So
Yeah.
you have that. So it is the context that determines. And this is where when people are not exposed to other people's context, then other people's behavior will appear weird. I remember one evening I was waiting for my wife in, I can't remember, was it in Manchester or Birmingham? She's in the building. So I was standing outside with a few of my friends, and I was wearing the Arabic costume. We call it the jalabiyah. In Malaysia, we call jubah or jalabiyah. I was wearing that. And along came an English lady, and she looked at me and she made the remark, "Oh, are you ready to go to bed? Because it looks like a nightie, right?" So our cultural behaviors coming from our culture, our context, will appear weird because somebody is evaluating it from a different context. Yeah. So culture's meta-state levels is that culture is a logical level of meanings, beliefs, values, and so much more. So that's what's happening. So when we talk about culture is internal, we are specifically now referring to culture is a logical level. So these cultural frames are mostly received and accepted, shaping our unconscious assumptions and beliefs. Yeah. Another example about it being logical levels and all that. I remember since young, now for personally, I got rid of that cultural meaning and beliefs. In the Malay culture, it is rude to touch somebody's head, because head is considered the highest part of a person. So now I'm relating to you the Malay meaning of it, the cultural meaning. Is the highest part of a person. It refers to a person's honor and dignity, so you shouldn't mess up with it. So even if the head of a small child, you don't touch that head, because that represents, so X equals to Y, right? You shouldn't touch that because that is that person's honor. So you shouldn't mess with it. So I got rid of that. So that's why when my grandchildren come, I shake their head and scratch the head, and they like it very much. So some of the cultural regulations that we are used to, do they still serve us? So these are some of the questions that we want to ask when we understand what culture is. Now, externalizing. So we have all of those inside. Then what happens is that we externalize those in various forms. So cultures are externalized in various ways. Our behavior, our rituals, our ceremonies. the way that we dress, the way that we eat, how we eat. So our cultures are externalized in that particular way. So if you were to, let's say, look at traditional cultures, because nowadays modern cultures in terms of dress, I cannot tell the difference in the dressing anymore. Yeah, because people have. So this is where realizing that culture is a construct. From my perspective, if people begin to dress the same, it's okay. However, some people are not okay. Why are you dressed like that? You are not honoring our culture. That kind of thing. So the behaviors are just the performance of meaning. So despite the performance of meaning, so this is what we are seeing when people talk about cultures. Despite those, we need to realize that cultures are internal. Yeah, it's an inside-out game. So the fully human life is the human who lives inside out. The outside-in game is the game of an undeveloped child. That's the outside-in game. So once we realize that culture is internal, then there are so many things that we can do with it. Otherwise, we get stuck in the fact that I must perform these behaviors, the performance of meaning. I must perform this in order for me to fit in with this culture. So re-evaluating. So in my case, what I now have in mind is just that I perform in those ways for the purpose of establishing rapport. That's all. It's for the purpose of establishing rapport. I do not allow those to define me. It's for the purpose of human interaction and human connection. So culture is shared, and culture also changes. And as I was preparing for this, I came across some pictures to show the different ways that people dress, whether they're in 20s or 50s or whatsoever. So you notice that the cultural change, cultures evolve, but they can also change, improve, or even be designed. So when people stop accepting a culture's content, it weakens and eventually disappears. So I'm showing you the cultural change in terms of the external. So this is in the 1920s. This is in the 1970s, and this is in 2020. So over that 100-year period, externally, we see those changes. However, what we were discussing earlier, culture is not just external. Culture comes from internal. So when we notice these cultural changes, what drove those external changes are the internal change, the beliefs, the values, the meanings, the frames, those change in order for what's outside to change. Okay, so the cultures of meaning, they are diverse and numerous. They encompass everything from cultures of violence and greed to cultures of optimism, art, and democracy. So humans create cultures around the experiences and values. And stories and cultures. Stories play a central role in transmitting cultural meaning. They provide a narrative for beliefs, morals, and values. So the role of stories in perpetuating or in developing cultures are that much more important. So that is why as neurosemanticists, as meaning makers, we want to take charge of the storytelling, the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we tell to others. So that's what I will be mentioning, and I'm just going to pause over here to invite any questions from any one of you. If you have any questions, I've got a few more points to discuss. So any questions with respect to what we've discussed earlier? Yeah, good with that? Yes, Ines, you have something?
Just a clarification about a word when you represent in those diagrams. The word context, when you say that, is it like context?
Context, yeah.
Yes. Is it like the context I live in, for example, my family is a context, my country is a context? Is this what we mean? Yeah.
Yes.
For example, in companies, the company would be a context. Is it? Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
We use the word context and frames interchangeably. Yeah. So it is the context that defines that. It is the context that. So that's why we use frame, because when we are exposed to something, and even before we put meaning to that thing, in order for us to put meaning, we go to the context. That's from where we create that meaning. So it's overarching, it's at the higher level. Yeah. Okay, so let me just cover a couple more points for today. So this is where understanding that cultures are basically the context of things, and the meanings that we give to whatever is happening around us in the outer world is created from the context of things. Then we realize that they don't need to define us, the meanings that we have. Yeah. So what? Just before we had a short discussion just now, I was talking about stories. Now, if you were to consider the stories that your parents told you about yourself and about your family, are those stories empowering or problematic? If the stories that you grew up with were disempowering or problematic, then your outlook towards life and your meaning making about life would be problematic as well. It's just that once we understand that meanings come from our frame, how we put meaning to things, it comes from our frame, then when we change those meanings, those frames, then those meanings will change and our experience of the world starts to change. So that's why Richard Bandler said this: it is never too late to have a happy childhood. What he is not referring to is to change what happened in the childhood. That had happened in the past, nothing can change that. It's the meanings that you put to the stories that happen, that is what's empowering or disempowering. And interestingly, I was watching the documentary on Arnold Schwarzenegger. He had an elder brother, and I think it's a 3-part series or 4-part series. So in one of those, he was mentioning that when they grew up in a household that was, I would say, quite abusive, because his father, after the Second World War, because his father served in the German army, he survived. So basically, when his father went back to Austria, one was, I would say, the trauma of witness to violence hurt him mentally and emotionally. So today we call it PTSD, post-traumatic syndrome. Yeah, I can't remember.
I think it's called post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes,
if I'm not
thank you.
mistaken.
Post-traumatic stress syndrome. So he experienced that. And the other is he served in the German army, and the Germans were the so-called the losers of the world. So that also affected his self-esteem. So his father, Arnold Schwarzenegger's father, was very abusive. And understanding that he came from that background, we can understand. So very abusive. So both Arnold and his elder brother grew up in an abusive environment. His brother, I think at about the age of 30 something, committed suicide. Probably the legacy of growing up in an abusive environment. Now, in retrospect, what Arnold was looking at it. So this word struck me to the core, because what Arnold said is that the very thing that drove my brother to suicide, is referring to the abusive upbringing, the very thing that drove my brother to suicide was what made me successful as a person. Yeah, because the event happened. The behavior of the father beating the children and all that happened. Now, his brother was using stories about abuse, about how hard things are. So consumed by those stories drove him to suicide. Yet Arnold, he had different stories inside of him, even though the physical abuse was there. However, the stories that he had in him was about him getting out of that situation and making someone of himself and looking for opportunities for that. So he was running around with those stories in his mind. So that's why we need to consider the stories. And that's why Bandler said, it's never too late to have a happy childhood, because now you can re-author your narratives. And guess what? In neurosemantics and NLP, we have the change personal history pattern. We have the change history using meta states pattern. We have releasing negative emotions pattern. We have the decision destroyer pattern. We have the re-imprinting pattern. And we have the finishing unfinished business pattern. All of this under timeline techniques. So to be able to re-author our stories. Okay. So that wraps up what I have prepared to present to you. I hope that you have found that to be useful. Before we end, I would like to, in a short while, I want to invite your experiences about this session as well. I would like to invite you to just go meta for a bit and to look into your life and to assess the cultures that you have been exposed to in your life. And remember, I mentioned to you, we are multicultural. Even though I grew up in a small village, mainly a Malay village. I had experience with a Chinese friend, a Korean friend. Later on, I went studied overseas. So our experiences are multicultural. What are the experiences from your culture? What are the how has that shaped your culture now? Which parts have you taken and affirm it to yourself, and which parts have you just push it aside in order for you to take something else in. So just take a moment to reflect on what you have learned about culture in this session, meaning and context, to identify the cultures that you've accepted and created in your life, and how do they impact your daily experiences. So I would just like to end there with something for you to think about, especially for those of you who are in Malaysia. I hope that it will not prevent you from going to sleep tonight as you think about that. However, for Ines, that's not a problem because she's just about to start her day. So I hope that you found something useful. So before I go around to check what's your learning, just to open up for questions. First, any questions that any one of you have? So go ahead.
Atsuki, can you hear me?
Can you make it louder, Selena?
Can you hear me?
Okay, now, yeah.
Okay, I try closer. I heard you mention just now about when it comes to the behavior, the performance, meaning, you mentioned about established rapport, the human connection. How can you share more about that? How do you relate?
Okay. Rapport works on the principle that like attracts like. Yeah, like attracts like. So, if I want to get close to you, I be as like you as I can. So that's the natural human tendency to like what, like who they are, because it's, oh, you are just like me, so I'm okay. But if you're different from me, then, so it works on that principle. And this is where, for me, how I use cultural, I'll use the word cultural behaviors in order to build rapport with people. So if I know that that person speaks in Malay, then how I approach the person is, apa khabar? So that is helping to build rapport. Yeah. So for the purpose of social connection. Now, I know that when I do that, it doesn't control my, I would say, my identity. So now I'm using culture as a, I'll use the word dress, as a dress. So if you are wearing that dress, then I'll wear that dress so that I can be close to you. Yeah? And if somebody else is wearing a different dress, then I'll wear a different dress. So we are talking in English right now because that's the common language that each and everyone understands. Yeah, the moment you speak in Selena, what do you speak? Cantonese, Mandarin, Mandarin lah. The moment you speak in Mandarin, then I'll be out of rapport because I don't understand that. Yeah. And the moment Ines, you speak in Portuguese, then I'll be out of rapport. So we find something that we have in common. So this is how understanding that culture is a mental construct. So what I do is that I will not allow that to regulate my my way of living. I'll use it to help me to get closer to others because it is all about relationship and building connections. Yeah. Because the reason why we want to have that distinction is that if you hold that culture is something that I must, do. Then because I speak in Bahasa Melayu, I meet Ines, I must speak in Bahasa Melayu, and Ines will go, so she'll be out of rapport. So yes, culture is, to me, culture is very important in us getting close to others. At the same time, I'm also multicultural, that I can also change the way. So when I'm with Ines, then I'll put on the neither of us speak English actually. We are we are non-native English speakers, so I'll change to fit to fit with that. And with Selena, with Guat-Ching. So we are, the word that I use, that culture is to me a tool that I use to build connection with others. What's more important are my values. Yeah. So I am very particular about my values. And as Stephen Covey puts it, when your values are based on timeless principles, then your values are much more powerful. So that's why we are talking about principle-centered values rather than values that are driven from preferences. Some people, their values are based on preferences, and that is rather weak. We want our values to be based on principles that are what I call non-time sensitive. These are universal values. So if a certain culture doesn't contradict with my values, I'm okay with trying out whatever culture it is. For example, the way of eating, I eat with my hand, I eat with fork and knife, fork and spoon, with chopstick. But if I eat with chopstick, Selena, you have to wait for me lah. I take very long time to eat. So because those cultural differences doesn't contradict my values, I'm okay with that. Yeah. Make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Some pieces are okay, just setting in my mind.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was like loosen, and now they are joining. And I liked your way of explaining rapport. It's similarity attracts similarity, things like that. So I haven't thought about that way, you know. Although I understand what support is, what I have to, my performance, I learned this, but I didn't have this concept. I thank you, Mazur. It was helpful. And thanks for Selena for asking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions?
I do have one, Kat here.
Yes.
Okay. I would like to ask a question from the point of view of an organization.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the best way to change the culture in organization, especially if the current culture is very silo? They all work in their own divisions. There is no teamwork. And based on my observation, it's really tough to get them to work together. So based on your experience, what would be the best way to help them change to ensure that, you know, the organization can be more cohesive? They work together as one unit rather than everybody is fighting their own battles. Yeah, so that would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you. That question requires a few years for me to answer. No, just kidding. However, because there are so many different levels that we can go to in order to answer that question. However, the quick thing about changing culture is apply to self first. Whatever culture that you want to bring, you need to be the exemplar of that particular culture first. Otherwise, it will become just like hot air. You are campaigning for something and you are not applying. So that's why in neurosemantics, that's the number one maxim: apply to self, rather than telling people that you need to do this and this and this. You apply it to yourself. So, for example, in the context of an organization, you feel strongly that people need to interact more, then you be the person to step up and to do the interacting from the space of compassion and caring. Rather than from the space of telling people what to do, you do it out of compassion, because by doing that, you are creating a more enjoyable workplace. You are creating a workplace where people are collaborating with one another. So what it means that it is not about telling people to collaborate, you collaborate with others. And especially when you know that others are not collaborating with you, that is when there is that greater need for you to collaborate with that person, because you set the example of doing it. And another one from neurosemantics is that what we do is we focus on within our power. We have our power zone. Our external powers are our behaving and our doing. So if something is outside of our power, then you will be que sera sera, what will be will be. If it is outside of our power, just focus on behaving from your powers of speech and power of doing, and whatever the outcome from that, then that's none of our business anymore. Our business is to speak and to behave in ways that are congruent with our values. If the people around us are not accepting it, that's none of my business anymore. My business is for me to be kind and loving to others. When I say that, I'm coming from the reference in my mind about there was the time when the Prophet he had a neighbor who keeps on doing nasty things to him, throwing rubbish in his path, throwing sand on him, speaking harshly to him. And yet he did not even do anything trying to change that lady's behavior. All that what he did was just to focus on being kind and loving to that particular lady. And he came to the point whereby one day he noticed that the lady was not out there trying to make his life difficult. He knocked on the door of that lady's house and checked, excuse me, how are you? Are you okay? So out of kindness, to ask her, is she okay? The lady was stunned. He said, Muhammad, don't you know that I'm the one who's doing all those nasty things to you? Yeah, I know you are the one who did all those things to me. It's just that you're not doing that to me today. So I'm wondering whether you're well or not. So he was not trying to change her. He's just focusing on his behavior to be incongruent with his value. So if your value in an organization is the value of collaboration, teamwork, working together, cooperation, and all that, you want to start with yourself, especially when you are, so work on things within your power zone. Yeah. If it is within your power, let's say part of your job scope, to organize functions that will get people together, then use that power in order to promote this new culture. So culture comes from you. That's why in meta coaching, we say that we bring change to the world one conversation at a time. So it is not about changing society, it's about changing individuals in the society, and the society gets changed. I hope that covers. I know that I'm able to cover just a little bit because that is a really big question that you have asked there. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. I really love the ending. Never thought of it that way. I think you mentioned how we change individuals and the individuals themselves will change the culture that they're in. So that is something that I'm going to ponder, and hopefully that'll help me in what I'm doing at the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Guat Ching, thank you for your message over there. So before we end, like what I would like to enjoin upon you is that to understand that these concepts about culture, culture shapes us. However, once we understand where culture comes from, what culture is, then we can now use culture as a tool to enrich our lives and the lives of others rather than being a victim to a certain culture, because any culture in the world has its flaws. There are no cultures that are perfect. So what we are doing is that we are adopting the culture that works for us and works for the people around us. To not be a slave to culture, we are the ones who are determining the culture that we live in. Yeah. So before I end, just to go around very quickly, what is your takeaway from this session? So I'll start off with Guat Ching. So what's your takeaway?
Thank you, Marzuki. I truly like this today's session. It's very useful to me. And also the aha moment is when you say that we have a different culture, different experience, different belief, different rapport. That's why we create different meaning frames, and that's the reason why we interpret the context differently. Yeah, and sometimes why misunderstanding happen is because how we create the meaning and how we interpret the context differently.
Wow. Thank you, Guat Ching. And Selina, over to you.
I like when we got our own meaning for the culture that we grow with. But then when we come to building a rapport for a human connection, I can maybe in order for me to build the connection, I may try to fit in your culture, to understand your culture, but that doesn't affect my own value. So we keep the boundary. So that's quite meaningful.
Wow. Thank you, Selina. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
And Ines, how about you?
Hey, I think it's more about the cultural evolution, because I've been, since there was the typing machine, you know, I come from those time of typing machine. Now we have completely different devices, and all about the behavior of people's behavior changed a lot from all this time. And now my turn to to adapt to these changes with not feeling different, without feeling that I am different from the others, because the world changed from my perspective. And sometimes I feel like, I'm not this way, but I maybe now understanding this and using rapport and a lot of acceptance about the changes will help me to adapt it to all these changes that I see now, you know, and to accept. It's not about me, it's not about my world, it's about the world that I live in, but not my world. So, yeah, it made me think about all this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ines. Right. And Kat, go ahead. What's your takeaway?
I really love the quote by Richard Branley, I believe. It's never too late to have a happy childhood. Because recently, me and my colleagues have actually been trying this test to determine our attachment styles. So if anybody would like to know more about it, there are 4 types of attachment styles, and basically those attachments have been shaped since you were a kid.
Mhm.
So it's shaped by your surroundings, your parents, and essentially your culture.
Mm.
However, you can see the changes that you have experienced. You're growing up to become someone that you were as a kid,
Mm.
and now you are more secure in life. So that quote just opened my eyes to say that, it doesn't matter how many years have gone past, how old, how much we are growing older, we
Mhm.
can still not so much change the past, but create a new one so that we don't hold on to it. Because when you hold on to bad memories, bad moments, it will then turn you into a bitter person, and you do not want to live your life until the end and affect everybody around you so negatively. So that really just opened my mind and be like, you know what? We are still young at heart. It doesn't matter how old you are. You are still a child, and you are allowed to have a happy child once again or for the first time. So that was my key takeaway for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. So with that, I would like again to thank you. Say thanks to all of you. Selena, Ines, Guat-Ching, Kat, thank you for being here. I hope that you've, with that takeaway, you have something that is useful for yourself. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. So with that, thank you. Good night. God bless. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See you. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.